Hey everyone, welcome to the Ask Podcast. My name is Justin and I'm your host. Today we're joined with Simon. Simon is a physio at Zone 34, and Zone 34 is basically this clinic that works with a lot of sports teams, from my understanding. We've got a couple physios lined up from Zone 34, and Simon's the first one. Welcome to the podcast, Si.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me. Love the idea, love the name.
Thank you.
Keen to be involved.
Si and I's relationship started almost a year ago now. Basically, when I applied and interviewed for the Sydney Kings internship, Simon had the luxury of interviewing me.
That's right, yeah. It was a great pleasure.
And yeah, that's how we met. And so Si, throughout his time with the Sydney Kings, has basically been mentoring me throughout, asking a lot of good questions, kind of keeping our juices flowing, not just me, but all the Sydney Kings interns. So really appreciate that.
No problem. Your turn to ask me a few questions and get my juices flowing, as you say.
Don't mind the little pup.
Yeah, don't mind the little pup. Hopefully she doesn't kick off, but she'll be right.
We're at Simon's
in-laws house.
Fantastic place. So thanks for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. This is not sports physio money. They're in a different profession, but anyway.
Okay, let's see how well I know you. We're going to start with 2 truths and 1 lie.
Okay, sounds good. So my favourite book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman. My favourite song is Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Okay.
And my favourite movie is Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino.
I think the song suits you, so I'm going to go Song's the Truth. I don't know much about the book, so I'm going to go on a whim here and say Pulp Fiction's the lie.
So the song is the lie, but it does suit me, and I do like that song, but I don't know if it's my favourite. But Pulp Fiction's definitely my favourite movie, and Thinking Fast and Slow is definitely my favourite.
What's Thinking Fast and Slow?
So it's by Dan Kahneman, and it talks about the way, so he kind of separates our brain into the primitive brain and the more advanced brain, and so the primitive brain has created a lot of shortcuts over time and kind of takes over when you make snap judgments and snap decisions and things like that, and it's about how that leads to a lot of logical fallacies and leads to a lot of mistakes and things like that, and how people struggle to deal with things like statistics or things like probabilities and that sort of thing. So it's just about how the brain, I guess, plays tricks on us and is the cause of a lot of our logical fallacies and mistakes and things like that. And it's not so much, well, I guess it's understanding them at least, so you can be a bit more aware of them and maybe catch yourself making them or catch others making them. But it's also very much like, you're not going to fix this. This is how our brain works. Just understand it, but also don't feel like an idiot when you make mistakes or when, it's hard for us to be, we'd love to think of ourselves as perfectly rational beings, and we're obviously far more rational than any other species on this earth, but our rationality is extremely limited. And it's just important that we understand that, because we can be very confident with our judgments, and our brain is designed to trick us that way and make us feel confident about decisions we make, even if we're not that honestly sure about how we made them. It's just very good, and it opened me up to that type, and I read a lot about that stuff now, and a lot of other books, and maybe some of them are better than Thinking Fast and Slow, but I think it just was such a perspective shift for me and opened my eyes to this whole way of dealing with and accepting uncertainty and the fact that we aren't going to make perfect decisions very often, and we just need to be aware of it.
Yeah, sounds like a great read.
It's a great read.
Do you have it here?
Yeah, I've got it on an ebook, so I don't have a hard copy for you. But
I'll have a look at it.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, okay. Cool, so let's rewind back a little bit for the listeners and for me actually. What got you into physio? How did this journey start for you?
So it started probably in a bit of a cliched way, and the way a lot of people initially get into physio was that I grew up playing sport, got injured, went to the physio, thought that seems pretty cool. In year 10, we do work experience here, where you do a week where you just, hang out in a workplace as a 15-year-old kid. And I went to a physio clinic, and actually that physio was the physio for the Sydney Spirit, which was the Sydney Kings for like 1 year. The Sydney Kings folded, and then they made this new team, the Sydney Spirit, and it lasted a year and folded, and then the Kings came back. But anyway, he was physio for the Sydney Spirit, and I was a basketball player, and so I got to spend 1 day there, and I was mind blown. I was like, oh, this is awesome and stuff like that. So it was very much, early on, it was very much the glitz and glamour, or the perspective of glitz and glamour of working in sport, despite the fact that I'm not good enough to play sport professionally. And then from there, So that's what got me into it, and that's what gets a lot of people into it. But as you would know, the dropout rate in physio is quite high, and a lot of people that get into physio then move into other careers. So I guess what kept me in it, and once again, this is cliched in a different way, was just the ability to, I guess in a very small but hopefully meaningful way, impact people's lives and help them achieve things or get through things that were challenging to them. And then the other side of it that has kept me in it and kind of strengthened my want to do it in the first place is that in terms of subjects at school and stuff like that, science was always my thing. You know, I wasn't too much for writing essays and stuff like that, but I love figuring out how things work. And in my mind, you know, the human body is just about up there with the most complex thing you can try and figure out. So that you're never going to run out of questions to ask. You're never going to run out of things to learn. You're never going to run out of things like that. So I love the study of the human body. I love being able to make small impacts in people's lives. So yeah, that's, I guess, what got me into it and then what has kept me into it.
Yeah. So obviously I met you through the Sydney Kings.
Yeah.
Being a physio for a pro sports team is a dream for so many physio students. What was your journey like? So starting from your education all the way to actually landing the job as a Sydney Kings physio, how did that happen?
Yeah, so sports physio was always my goal.
Yeah.
Even from being in, you know, a 15-year-old kid and thinking about physio, the vision in my head was sports physio. And so during uni, I was always a bit more interested in those sorts of subjects and those sorts of placements. And I did some sports trainer work with the Sydney Uni AFL team and that sort of thing, just to try and find ways to get involved in that world. And then I was very lucky with 2 placements. I had one placement which was a student-led physio clinic at Canberra Uni, where people basically pay $20 for physio, but they're getting seen by students for muscular, which is very unique and really developed my confidence that I could go straight into private practice and musk and that sort of thing. And then my very last placement was at a very good physio clinic in Sutherland, just called Sutherland Physiotherapy and Sports Injury Clinic. And the head physio there was a physio with the Rabbitohs at the time. I think he's now with the Tigers, although I'm not 100% sure. You know, there's a bit of turnover in the sports world, but they had a few sports physios there. They had a sports doctor there, that sort of thing. And I had a placement there, and I made it very clear that like that was the type of place that I wanted to work. And so when I finished my placement there, I continued to do some shadowing with him and that sort of thing, and that led to him offering me my first job. And so through that, I was able to get some sports coverage with soccer and a few other bits and pieces and learn a lot, obviously, from him about sports physio and that sort of thing. And then from there, the contacts that I'd made earlier with my sports coverage work at Sydney Uni AFL, which funnily enough didn't think much of me because I was a uni student who was far more interested in getting pissed every weekend and turned up to most of the games hungover and that sort of thing. So he didn't actually think I was a very good sports trainer at all. Yeah. I must have just reached out to him at bang on the right time where they were having a bit of a turnover crisis with their staff. And so he's like, all right, like come in for an interview, why not? Thankfully, I was a bit of a better version of myself at that stage than I had been when he first met me. And he was good enough to be open-minded and change his perspective of me a little bit. And so I worked at his clinic and did physio for the Sydney Uni AFL team. I was with them for a while. And then in terms of making my way into the Sydney Kings, Dave, who's the head physio of the Sydney Kings, obviously you know, and I'm sure you're trying desperately to get on this podcast, he presented on a course that I was on, the Physio Sports Level 2 course. And he was working with the Flames at the time in the WNBL. And so I just basically cold messaged him on LinkedIn after that course and said, look, I like basketball. I'm working in AFL at the moment. AFL and basketball are my 2 sports. So I grew up playing and following and that sort of thing. I'd love to meet you, just have coffee and find out how you kind of got your way into basketball physio and that sort of thing. So we did that, and that was a nice conversation and that sort of thing, and didn't really go anywhere. And then 6 months or a year later, he got the head physio job at the Boomers. And I saw that on LinkedIn, messaged him again, hey mate, you know, congratulations, that sort of thing. If you're ever free for a coffee, love to catch up again. Caught up and spoke. And once again, very selfless with his time, as you know, Dave is, but nothing came of it, which was fine as well. You know, I wasn't just going there and like, give us a job. Like I genuinely wanted to know about his journey and get to know him as a person. Probably another 6 months after that, I got a random phone call from him basically saying, look, I've been put in charge of the physio for the Sydney Kings. I need at least one other physio to help me with that. I know you're interested in basketball. We've chatted about it. Would you like to come in and interview? And I did. And then also, unbeknownst to me, he knew very well because at that time the Flames were associated with Sydney Uni. He knew the GM of Sydney Uni AFL really well, and he'd called her behind my back and basically said, "Is like, what's he like?" Basically, in a team environment, you know, you're not going to know anything about physio skills. I can figure that out in the interview, but you know, how does he fit in? And thankfully, she gave me a good review and got the job. And so I've been at Zone 34 for almost 4 years, and for 3 of those years was working with the Kings. And this year, obviously, got some plans to move overseas and that sort of thing. So I'm not doing any Kings stuff this year, but I'm still with Zone. And that's where I am now.
You just touched on it. You've got some plans to move along.
Mm-hmm.
So what's exactly next for you?
No idea. I mean, moving to London is the plan. In terms of professionally, I've got no idea. Like, I don't have any jobs lined up over there or anything like that. I do have contacts over there and friends living over there. And look, to be bluntly and brutally honest, I'm not planning to work in sport for the first little bit, because the whole point of moving there is, you know, moving with my new wife and having the opportunity to travel Europe every weekend. And so, as you would well know, sport takes your weekends away from you. So yeah, early on I'm looking for kind of a clinic type job and something that I can run away from on the weekends and travel Europe, and then you know, the itch will come back and I'll be back in sport, hopefully, if people will take me and make use of some of the contacts that I do have and see what's floating around.
Yeah, right. Congratulations on the marriage.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
When was that?
It was September this year.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really good. It was a great day.
How's being married?
Being married is more or less the same as before. I mean, we're already living together and stuff like that. So that all feels the same in a good way. I mean, there's a reason we got married. We were very much loving our life together, so that hasn't changed. But the wedding was awesome, and it was a fantastic day. Yeah.
How are you finding balancing work and just having like life outside of it?
I mean, right now it's not too bad because it is just the clinic, and so the clinic work is a bit more structured. You know, you've got your days where you work longer, days where you work shorter, days off, and things like that. So that's pretty easy. I think the challenge, and I've faced plenty of them over the past 7 years with Sydney Uni AFL and with the Kings in particular, and in particular due to COVID, probably not so much in particular due to the Kings, but being in a pro sport environment, but then also having the uncertainties of COVID and schedule changes and relocations and things. There's been some really hard times to find that balance, and I don't think that I've nailed it every time.
Have you had much experience with burnout?
Yeah.
You have? Yeah? Okay. So it's such a profound topic in the physio world. Like you mentioned, heaps of people in the profession burn out or they switch careers. Why do you think that is? And how did you manage or navigate your experience with burnout?
So why I think that is, I think that happens when there's a mismatch between the reasons someone gets into a situation and the reason someone gets into a situation and then the reality of that situation. So that probably comes back to what we're talking about with sport, where coming into it, you think the lifestyle's going to be great, the money will be good and that sort of thing. And if it doesn't match up to that, then you're going to struggle internally with the desire to continue with that. I think that, and I mean, the other part of it as well is with people, even where the internal expectation is met by the reality, is a lot of people in physio and a lot of these kind of academic worlds are overachievers, and so they're going to stretch themselves beyond their capacity, and there's a lot of pressure and externalised pressure to be the best physio you can be and work in pro sport and that sort of thing, and so you end up working crazy hours, not saying no to anything. And this kind of goes against my advice from before, but in terms of taking opportunity, you take every opportunity that's presented to you, even if it clashes with others and even if it clashes with things. And so you stretch yourself too thin and you end up burning out that way. I think there are a couple of reasons, and that's probably more the experience I've had with burnout. I think I thankfully learned relatively early on that I needed to have an internal drive to do what I'm doing, and I think I've found that, or have that. And so I haven't had too much burnout in terms of expectation and reality not matching up, but I think the stretching yourself too thin is where I've dealt with it in the past. And I'll give you an example or a story about that. So when I got the Zone job and the Sydney Kings job, it was mid-season of the Sydney Uni AFL team. I'd gotten into a bit of a groove with that clinic and with the team, and I knew that even though I'd be busy, I could do the graduate certificate, which is the first half of the Masters, I could do that in a year. because I thought I'd be able to manage my time enough to get that done in a year. People do it from anywhere over 1 to 3 years, and then the Masters over 1 to 3 years, and I just wanted to do grad cert in one, Masters in one. So I was doing my grad cert, which was all online and all self-directed, which is full-time uni, like 20 hours a week uni study. I was working full-time between the clinic that I was at, called Sports Lab, and the Sydney Uni AFL team. And then I didn't want to abandon that team mid-season, and I told Dave that in one of our early interviews, and once again he said that was one of the things that he kind of found admirable in terms of wanting to hire me. But I wanted to finish the season with them, but I had to start the pre-season with the Kings, and Dave needed me to start some shifts in zone. So I was working at 2 clinics, 2 sports teams, and had full-time study going on for about a 2 to 3 month crossover period where that's what I was doing. And it flattened me. I got really, really sick, crashed my car, and it was entirely my fault. I pulled out of a intersection. I was thinking about a million different things and just drove straight into a car coming the other way. They spun out. It was pretty nasty. They didn't get hurt at all. They totaled a parked car. I felt bad for them because they just come out of their house and their car's just folded in half. Totally my fault. Felt terrible. I was sick, and yeah, I really struggled with that portion of my life. And then I finished with the AFL team, finished a grad cert, finished at Sports Lab, and was just with Zone and the Kings, and then was able to do my Masters the next year, and it was okay. But that was a challenging time. In terms of how to deal with it, I mean, obviously I didn't do a great job because I crashed into somebody, but I think you need to constantly check in with the internal drive again and check that what you're doing actually matches up with who you want to be and is not just doing it because you think you should be doing it or you think there's some external forces suggesting that you should do it. And so, for example, in the example that I said, outside of being a bit more diligent on the road, I actually wouldn't change much because I'd never worked in pro sport. I really wanted to. I was doing my sports masters, which I really wanted to, and aligns with my, I guess, internal drive to explore the sports physio world as much as I can. And so even though I didn't really get much social time in that time, I was maybe a bit closed off to people around me and I didn't have many hobbies, I probably wouldn't change that because it matched up with what I wanted to do. The flip side of that is right now, when I told the Kings I didn't want to work this season because I'm moving halfway through anyway and I've got a bunch of weddings on and I've got friends' 30ths and bucks parties and stuff like that. And because the internal drive can change and fluctuate. Like I still have an internal drive to work my way through the sports physio world and navigate that. But it's a bit weaker at the moment. Like that's not my priority number one right now. My priorities are my relationships and the social side of my life. So my new marriage, obviously, friends, family, and experiencing some of these once in a lifetime events such as marriages and 30th, as trivial as it sounds, bucks parties, as trivial as it sounds, but experience these and not feel like I'm missing out on those. And, like I said, going to London, I'm not going to work in sport early on because my priority for that trip early is to get some travelling and spend quality time with my wife. So you need to constantly reevaluate that. If I was just in the mindset of you got to always climb the sports ladder, otherwise you'll fall off it, then I'd be going straight to London looking for a sports job, or I would have begged the Kings to keep me for half a season so I can stay in professional sport or that sort of thing. So I think that even though I didn't deal with burnout very well in that situation, I still don't think I would have changed too much about what happened because it did fit with my internal drive at the time. And so you just need to keep checking in with that, figure out what your internal drive is and make sure that what you're doing matches up with your priorities at that time. And your priorities can change and you're going to have lifelong priorities, which for me includes obviously the social side, friends, family and my wife. And also part of that includes a professional drive to explore the sports world as much as I can, get into education and that sort of thing. But they're going to differ in their weighting during different times of my life. And so it's important for me to always check what my priority is and whether my actions are actually matching up to that.
Yeah. How do you see kind of taking this break from pro sports? Do you see this break as a good thing or kind of like, okay, it might bring you a step back for being out for a while? How do you see that?
I definitely see it as a good thing for my mental health.
Yeah.
But in terms of in the sports physio world, it's not a good thing. I don't know whether it's going to be a step back. Like I don't think having a year off from sport is necessarily going to massively change people's perceptions of me with interviews or things like that. But it's definitely not going to propel me either. So I'd see it, or I'm hoping to see it as a a stall. So basically get to a level and just stall there and focus on other parts of my life, and then maybe climb again. It might end up being a step back and then climbing from there. And if that's the case, once again, I'm really comfortable with that because it aligns with my priorities right now. And if I take a step back, I take a step back. I don't care. Like I want to look after my relationships and my mental health and everything right now. And then once I've had some time really focusing on that, then I'll shift my view again, and I'll do my best to keep my relationships strong. But I'll look at climbing that ladder again and talking to people and networking and doing all the same steps I did the first time to climb the ladder. Like I'm comfortable and confident that can work again.
Yeah, man, that's very admirable.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm not nailing it, but I can talk about what I want it to look like.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
For sure.
Like I say, if it's a step back, I don't care. Of course, I'm going to fucking care. But I'm trying not to.
Yeah. I think coming from like a physio student, you don't actually hear a lot of these stories. Like you have an idea, or you can guess what it will look like when you get into pro sport or into the working environment. But yeah, hearing like real time stories, I think that just hits different.
Yeah.
Like that's not something you would think of.
Yeah. And I think it's like people don't really want to talk about it. People want to talk about what they've done well, and we live in the social media age. Like you only see the promotions, you only see the championships, you only see the shiny new polo that someone got from working at a new sports club. Like you don't see what they're dealing with to get there, or the internal struggles, or you don't see the time where they take time off sport. So I'm glad that you feel that's helpful for me to say that.
Yeah. What are your 1 to 2 pieces of advice for people wanting to go into sports?
So probably the biggest one would be, and it kind of came through in my story about how I got to the Kings, is to open yourself up to as many experiences as possible. And there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, you're going to learn from each experience, so you're going to develop more knowledge and that sort of thing. But another part of that is you're going to network, and you'll be surprised. Like I said before, Dave knew the GM of Sydney Uni AFL. He's never worked in AFL in his life, but he knew her through different bits and pieces, and that contributed to me getting the job at Zone. So you never know who you're going to meet, you never know what you're going to learn. Another part of that is when people are looking for sports physios and that sort of thing, they care a little bit more about your level of experience rather than where you've got those experiences. And I'll explain that a little bit more. So let's say you want to work in basketball. What some people might try and do is they might only look at and approach basketball opportunities and try and climb their way up the basketball ladder. What is, I would say, far more effective, and I've got a few examples that I'll spit at you for this, is spread out your focus, take opportunities as you can, climb any ladder you can, because it's far easier to jump from ladder to ladder at the top end than it is to climb up the one ladder. So for example, I'm a basic and low level example of this, because I wouldn't have got the King, and Dave has said this openly, honestly, I wouldn't have got the King's job if I hadn't been working in semi-professional AFL. There's no semi-professional basketball jobs in New South Wales. So if I was only trying to work in basketball and I was working in amateur basketball, he wouldn't have given me the job because I haven't even worked in semi-professional sport. He didn't care if it was AFL. He just knew that I worked in a semi-professional sporting environment, so the next step for me was to be in a pro environment. Another example would be Toby, who you obviously just had on. He's head of performance at the Kings. He played basketball as a kid, but he's never worked in basketball in his life. But they hired him as head of performance because he had great experience working in performance in rugby league and that sort of thing. So he had the resume as a performance guy without needing a resume as a basketball guy. Bigger example again is a guy called Les Gellis, who is, I don't know if he still is, but he has been for a long time and probably still is, the head of medical at the Brooklyn Nets. And he's an Australian guy, and he got that job having never worked in basketball in his life. He worked in predominantly soccer, so he worked for the Socceroos, the Australian national soccer team. He worked in some EPL clubs in England, the English Premier League. And because of that experience and dealing with high-level respected sports, everyone knows what the EPL is and everyone knows what kind of environment that is, then an NBA team, and he didn't apply for the Brooklyn Nets job. They headhunted him from soccer, and he didn't even play basketball growing up. Like, he had no interest, didn't really know it, went home, researched it, and went with it. So I think broaden your vision a bit and get opportunities where you can, and be really open to taking opportunities, because that's, if you want to get into professional sport, that's I think, the way to do it, and I think there's some evidence there to back that up.
Okay. That's really good advice.
Oh, good.
What about one or two pieces of information that most people would not know about sports? So what I mean by that is like something you should be wary of that most people won't know.
Yeah, okay. I don't know about the most people won't know part. I think it's something that people do talk about a bit, but I think it's something that is worth reiterating and is probably something people don't think about enough. Firstly is it's long hours, weird hours, high demand and poorly paid. That's sports physio across the board. And even the sports physios that are getting paid a lot, they're not really getting paid a lot for the amount of effort and hours and time and everything that they put in. And I mean, we made the joke before about panning the camera around to this beautiful house and saying this is what sports physio buys you, which it absolutely isn't. This is my in-laws' house and they're not sports physios. But yeah, just understand that it's hard. It's hard work and underpaid. And so you need to be doing it for something bigger than that. You need to be doing it because it's a passion or anything. There needs to be an intrinsic motivation to do it. It can't be based on a nice lifestyle or good money. The other thing to understand is you're the bottom of the pecking order. No one cares about the physios of professional sporting clubs. I mean, physios care about the physios of professional sporting club, but no one else does. Like, you don't win championships, you don't lose games, you know, players do, coaches do. You can contribute to a winning environment and a winning culture, absolutely, but you're bottom of the pecking order and you need to accept that role and expect to be treated that way. Expect to be, you know, not treated like shit, but expect to be one of the lower priorities on that team. I mean, I think you need to come in with that mindset because you're going to be passionate about physio, and I am, but you can't come in and think everyone's going to share that passion with you. So when you're, you know, giving players rehab drills or giving them prehab drills or warm-ups or things to do at home and stuff like that, you might think it's great. Like, you might, you know, oh, this is an awesome exercise and you feel it in this part and that's why it's so good and all that sort of stuff. But to them, it's just boring and it's not basketball, so why would they care? So you need to go in with that understanding because then you need to be empathetic with that and understand that at the same time. Like, they're spending plenty of their day doing stuff for basketball, and so to add to that without any other reason than you say it's good is going to be hard for them to do. So you need to educate around, prioritise, so don't just give every exercise that you think is good, or, you know, figure out what's actually going to be bang for your buck and maybe make a difference to them, either performance-wise or injury risk-wise, and then educate them and explain why it's so important, and come from a space of, not from a space of physio's great and this is exciting, but come from a space of, I know this is another thing you need to do and boring, and this is why I think even despite those negatives, it's really of value. So yeah, expect to be, I mean, you are bottom of the ladder and it's natural, but also make sure that you empathise with that, and that frames the way you speak to players, coaches, management, everything like that, coming from an area of understanding that they don't always want to hear what you have to say. And so only say things that you think are important and make sure that you have a good rationale for why it's important and that you can explain that to them.
Okay. One thing that I've commonly wondered is pressure in a sporting team environment. So there's multiple people you can be getting pressure from. All starting from the top, you can be getting it from like the owners, to the coach, to the players, or head of performance, to keep players playing. If you don't see them as fit to play, how do you navigate that pressure?
I think the answer becomes pretty similar. I think, once again, I mean, first and foremost, and this is something that I've struggled really hard with and slowly getting better, is you can't internalise that pressure. And once again, that comes down to empathy. They're putting pressure on you because they feel the pressure on themselves. So as a CEO or a coach, it's the pressure of winning. As a head of performance, it's the pressure of having a good performance staff that looks good on them. And the pressure on the player is to play and perform well and contribute to winning, but openly and honestly, and is to make sure that they're looking good for the next contract or they're getting those awards and that sort of thing. So firstly is, yeah, you can't take it personally. You have to understand that the pressure they're putting on you is because of the pressure they're feeling on themselves, and you're putting plenty of pressure on yourself, so you don't need to take on board their pressure. And then secondly is, it comes down to the rationale again. Like, you got to make sure, if you don't think someone's fit to play, there's got to be reasons behind it, and you need to explain very openly and once again empathetically, and understanding the pressure that they feel under to push you to get this person out, why that is and what the risks are and stuff like that, and help them make the decision with you, because a lot of these aren't yes/no decisions. Like, a lot of these are percentage risk decisions. You know, they're a 90% chance of getting through this game without re-injuring, but if they wait to next week, they're a 98% chance. And these are numbers that you can't create accurate numbers, but you've got to explain it in a way that's understandable. So you just wrap your head around, is it 50-50? Is it a 75% chance? Is it a 90% chance? And let them make the decision with you. There are some decisions that you need to take out of their hand where it's really medically unsafe, and you say they cannot play because they'll make this worse, which is bad for their health and long-term health and everything like that, and you have a duty of care to the players. But a lot of decisions aren't that life or death. Well, none of them are life, well, some might be, but very few are life and death. But they aren't that black and white. It's like, the chance of re-injury, which means they miss another 6 weeks, is this. Think about maybe a calf strain or something like that. The chance of, it's a 3-week calf strain. We know that a recurrent calf strain usually takes 2 extra weeks on top of the one the same time they took, plus 2 weeks. So if they re-injure this 3-week calf strain, they are looking at another 5 weeks out. The chance of them doing this is this. So are you willing to take a 30% risk that they miss the next 5 weeks? Or would you rather them miss this week and then have a 10% risk of missing 5 weeks? And that can be a conversation with the coach and the player, and they can decide. Educate. Don't always feel like you have to make the decision. You can inform and that sort of thing too. And you have to come in open-minded as well. And this is very hard too, because you want to be you are the professional of musculoskeletal health in the conversation. So you always want to come with the answers. But if you say, they can't play because this and this and this risk and that risk, and they come back with, well, what if we do this, and would that mitigate the risk? And it would. Then you've got to be open to be like, oh yeah, I didn't really think about that as an option. That would mitigate, and that shifts the risk back to this. So would you be comfortable with that risk of them playing? Yeah, it would. Okay, cool. So they're going to play with these limitations. So be very open with your reasoning and why you're saying what you're saying, and make black and white decisions when they're warranted, but don't feel like everything has to be a black and white decision, and don't feel like you have to be the gatekeeper about, whether guys play or not, because it's a very big decision that affects a great deal of people in the organisation, and they should all have a say in that decision, whether they've got musculoskeletal knowledge or not. They do have basketball knowledge, they have knowledge of the pressures of the season, they have contract knowledge, they have all this stuff that you don't have. So yeah, make it as collaborative as possible and share the pressure.
Yeah. Have you ever had a time where you really thought it's not a good idea for this player to play, but you got a lot of pressure from other members in the team to let this player play? Yeah,
I have. And probably the one injury that I think you need to be, or not the one, an injury that I've dealt with a bit, and more so with AFL than basketball, that you need to be black and white with, and is still potentially poorly, or is still poorly understood globally, but poorly understood especially by other stakeholders in the team, is concussion. And so I've had a lot of instances in AFL, although AFL were getting more educated about it, and so in basketball actually I've had more blowback with concussion, but I just haven't seen as many, where guys are feeling fine and it's been a week, which for a very long time was the guideline for concussion. And so I've dealt with a lot of pressure to let people play and that sort of thing, and I think that's a situation where it is your job to draw the hard line, explain it as best you can, explain it repetitively, have those conversations, feel like you're repeating yourself. It's annoying, it's frustrating. They should just listen to what you say, but they don't. Be willing, and once again, be empathetic. I know you feel good, but this is what's happening in your brain right now, and it doesn't always come with symptoms. Or, I know he looked good in non-contact training, but this is what's happening in his brain right now. If he gets hit again, this is what the risk is, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I have dealt with those situations, but I think if you're, and that's why you need to have reasoning, because the amount of pressure shouldn't change your decision. So if you don't think it's a black and white decision, the amount of pressure shouldn't change that fact. If you think it's a black and white decision, the amount of pressure shouldn't change that fact, because you need to be making your decisions from a medical standpoint. And then if you decide it's grey, then you should be willing to flex and bend based on other surrounding factors. But if you think the medical side of it's black and white, then all the pressure in the world shouldn't change your decision.